What's up, guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the NeoVintage podcast. I am Jabril, and I am with
Steve. Hope everyone's doing well out there.
And for you guys who have never seen the show before, we're just two guys that like to talk over the biggest stories in gaming, and we always like to start with what we've been playing. So, Steve, let me know what you've been playing.
Yeah, so not too much new, really. I've just been dabbling some of the backlog and trying to clear it out, see what I can still do. The only thing I did sort of restart is Dying Light. Techland's Dying Light. Now we've been talking about it for a while now that Dying Light 2 is doing something, or they're gonna announce something, whatever it may be, soon. And this is a game I've been wanting to replay for a long time. I do remember enjoying it, and finally the 5th anniversary edition, whatever they called it, it was out for $20. So I was like, you know what, let me snag it at that price, and I got to restart it, and I forgot how much I actually really love this game. It's all sort of coming back to me, but the sort of parkour aspect of it is really cool. I just like, zombie games are just a dime a dozen now, but this is still one that just speaks to me a little bit better. The open world nature of it, that isn't just like an empty open world, traversing it and stuff like that's cool. And then you get the literal politics in it that's between the two camps and stuff like that. So I've been spending some time with that, about a couple hours a night. I've been playing that, just trying to get past that sort of tutorial phase, and get some of the better skills. And I'm trying to remember a lot of these, nitpicky tricks and stuff to kind of gain experience. There's so many things that I forgot how well they do, that you don't really see in other games. Like, the more you jump and climb, the better at jumping and climbing you get, as it should be. The more melee weapons you use, the better at melee weapons you are and stuff like that. And the longer you go surviving, you get, the skill trees are broken into like survival, traversing, and like melees and stuff. And like, the more you focus on that aspect, the better you get in that one, skill tree, and get the different skills. And that's just something that just makes sense. It's like, you're spending all this time hunting in a game, you should be like an excellent hunter, not just a generic getting experience and stuff like that. So those are systems I'm excited to see hopefully appear more in video games in general, but also excited to see whenever we do see anything from Dying Light 2. I'm hoping they kept that for a sort of formula, because that feels like them. Anytime I would see this would feel like them. Like, their game has a specific feel, and I'm glad you're not a generic character. You play as a guy named Crane, who starts off with a simple mission, and it's not like the world's gonna be over and whatever. And, this area's infected already, so it's, as much as I don't like jumping into like the zombie games sometimes, I still really do like Dying Light, and I'm gonna keep playing it. I tried to launch Watch Dogs again, and that just immediately I took the game out of my system. I was like, I don't want to do this, because that game is like, there was nothing else for me to do, and I've only played like 5 hours, and I was like, no, and I put Dying Light back in, and even though I've played Dying Light back when it released, I don't even remember when it released, kind of close to launch.
I think it was like 2015, right? Sounds
like something like that, So to play a game that still looks, I got it on Xbox, so playing on the Series X, that game looks great. It looks like almost like a Series X game. I don't know if there's been continuous patches and stuff like that, but it looks really nice. I don't know if they ever did an Xbox One X upgrade, and that's what I'm playing, because it looks really good. Still has some blurs and stuff from an older game, but I think it's been fantastic, and that's all I've been playing. Actually, I've been dabbling a little bit on my Switch here and there for Mario and things like that, completing, getting all the stars and stuff, but nothing too new to say on that. Just been reigniting my love for Dying Light, so that's all I've been up to. So what have you been playing?
Yeah, well, I mean, before I say that, interesting thing about Dying Light, because now that you mention that, it's such an interesting game, because it's so good and nobody expected it to be, because it like came out of that whole like Dead Nation team thing. And
the Dead Island guys, yeah,
Dead Island. And funnily enough, it's it came out, it was amazing, and then they move on to the second one, and the second one's giving me a lot of like Dead Island vibes in terms of its like rocky development cycle. So it almost makes me feel like the first one was like a weird anomaly that like maybe shouldn't have been as good as you thought it would. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's weird. So I really hope for that 2 is good, but something about it is like, I have like a lot of nerves related to that game. Like, something's wrong, and I don't know what it is. Yeah, so for me, I kind of like play consoles in waves. Like I play like for probably a month or two, like nothing but Switch, and then nothing but PlayStation, and then nothing but Xbox, and I kind of just dive back and forth between the consoles depending on what games are available on their time. So I'm definitely in the middle of like an Xbox wave right now, and there's been like a lot of awesome additions to Game Pass lately that I've been cracking open and giving a shot. So Project Octopath, not even Project anymore, Octopath Traveler is on Xbox now, and that looks like incredible. So that's really awesome to be able to play on a big screen. I only played it handheld when I played it the first time on Switch, so I'm probably gonna get pretty deep into it this time. Hopefully I can beat it though. Not that I wasn't able to, but I just didn't get around to beating it the first time, so I'm gonna give it a real shot this time and see how far I make it. But yeah, it looks beautiful on Game Pass, so for anybody who hasn't played the game before and you guys have Game Pass, highly recommend that. And then also they added a game, I believe it's called Haven, and I saw some videos about it, and it's really, really cool game. And you basically play a couple in a really weird kind of sci-fi setting, and it's kind of exploring not only the world that they live in, but the kind of inner dynamics between them. And there's some degree of like social links where you're building rapport with her and or him, depending on who you play predominantly, but you can like interchange between them at any point that you want. And it's not a very challenging game, but it's a very interesting narrative that I like, and they're exploring some interesting some of the conversational elements between the couple is what kind of made it stand out for me, just because I haven't seen writing for a couple that accurate before, where it's just the small comments that I'm like, oh my god, I've never seen a game actually like kind of get those moments where he's like, okay, fine, you're being nice, and she's like, your butt's nice, like small things like that where I'm like that's just couple stuff right there. So I was having a good time with that, and it also on Game Pass, so I highly recommend it, and it looks beautiful. It has a really interesting kind of like cell shaded art style with it. The color palette is very jarring almost, but it's like alien world jarring, so it works really well. Runs great, so I'm not very far into it. I'm only about an hour in, so I want to get a little bit deeper before I report, how I feel about like the general story once it really gets cranking. But so far so good, and those are kind of like the two things I've kind of dabbled with. Is just mostly Xbox stuff. Still playing ESO, so I'm surprised with myself that I'm still playing that. Having a good time there. It's kind of like the same format. Again, it's like the other Elder Scrolls games, Fallout 76. Like you kind of go mission by mission by mission, trying to make your character better. You can buy like a house in here, so that's kind of what I'm building towards, is try to set up like a little bit of life down there. Get my life together in there. And so it's a pretty good time. But that's all I have to report, and I'll probably have more to report next week now that Game Pass is adding more and more stuff, and they tend to be a pretty high quality stuff. I would imagine there's a lot of stuff that I haven't gotten to that I'm gonna probably check out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I installed Haven yesterday, actually.
Very good.
Because I saw it, I'm like, oh, it looks kind of cool. It might be a game that I could play while my wife's there, and just to incorporate her a little bit. And so I'm glad I did, because now with obviously on Game Pass there's no harm in it, but I was like, it looked interesting. I saw some of the combat looked interesting. That's why as soon as you said it, I'm like, didn't I just install that? And I did. So I'm looking forward to it. I actually plan to probably start that later tonight or later today.
Yeah, my only concern was like, is this like a It Takes Two type situation, because it was like two people. I didn't see any prompt to add a second player, so luckily for me, I was like, okay, because I didn't want to get locked out of anything like It Takes Two, and I forget, No Way Out and stuff like that, those type of games where like, I know like some people like the co-op. I'm like a loner guy, so I don't want to play with nobody, so I was like, I hope I'm able to play this game. I didn't see any prompt for that, so for anybody who has concerns like, it's only me there, I've been playing it by myself completely fine. It's not something that like are like environmental puzzles where you need two people to do things. You're literally just tagging along with each other type situation.
Right, because from my understanding, It Takes Two is 100% two players. Like you can't even play that. A Way Out had like a weird solo mode, but apparently It Takes Two is like
definitely same guy too. I think Joseph Ferris or something like that.
Yeah, it's strictly like you need two people to play it.
Yeah, looks pretty cool though.
Yeah, no, I mean I'm interested. I'll probably look a little bit deeper into it, but
you let me know, because I ain't playing that.
I don't know if I'll play it, but maybe I'll find someone to watch.
Yeah,
but we'll see. All right, let's get into the stories for this one. Weird ones that I didn't specifically see coming. But Pikmin Go is a thing. So Niantic, the developers of Pokemon Go, are teaming up again with Nintendo on more AR games based on Nintendo franchises, starting with Pikmin. Their blog post announced a new partnership between the AR developer and Nintendo, where the two companies will jointly develop mobile titles using Niantic's AR technology and Nintendo's characters. The Pikmin game sounds like the first of these joint partnership games, and Niantic says it'll be released later this year. The app will include gameplay activities to encourage walking and make walking more delightful, Niantic says in its blog post. This will be the first title created by our Tokyo studio since it was established April 2018. So, it's interesting. This is a weird one, but as I thought about it since they announced it, it made sense. If I've only played Pikmin 3, that's the one Pikmin game I played on Wii U, sadly. I never picked up the Switch version, stuff like that. And, the levels are basically them running around the real world, they're very tiny and stuff like that. They're walking on cans and through blades of grass and flowers, and I'm like, you know what, this makes sense. I don't know exactly what the gameplay would be, watching them, and the gameplay in Pikmin is just kind of making them get together, solve some puzzles, and then get on a ship and survive. So I guess it would be a quicker version of that, but it makes a lot of sense. And we know Nintendo's, interested in this mobile market because it's been doing pretty well now, besides their first venture into it. So it'll be there for people. Again, I'm not the biggest Pikmin fan. I don't know. I'm sure I would download this as long as it's free to play. I'll probably download it, mess with it for a day, and then that'll be it. But it's there. What did you think of this?
Yeah, I'm not mad at it. It doesn't surprise me because obviously I feel like the entire world is trying to strike gold with that whole Go phenomenon because of how massive Pokemon Go was. So it doesn't surprise me that even like Niantic themselves that wouldn't be their final foray into that market. And a lot of people I would imagine would see this story and be like, who cares about Pikmin in 2021? But the reality is Nintendo's so protected with their IPs, so them willing to jump into bed with Niantic again to do that and to use one of their IPs is just always fascinating to me. To see those Nintendo and third-party relationships, because again, they're not the most common. Nintendo is very protected. They like to do things in-house. And so the fact that they really do seem to trust Niantic with their stuff. They've worked with them before, and so they're willing to continue with them. It's very interesting. Perfect IP, I think, for an AR game, especially navigating the real world. That specific format of gameplay style has never been something for me. And I don't think anybody in their right mind would think that this is going to be as big as Pokemon Go. Of course not, because the IP doesn't hold that same cachet that Pokemon does, or that worldwide recognition. However, I think this is formatted and set up for a very dedicated, minority of players that could really bring this game to success. I can definitely see that, as long as they put the care into it. And it seems like if one kind of mobile AR team is really dedicated to not only releasing a good product, but sticking by that product and having a steady stream of content for it, it's Niantic for sure. Because even if you look at some of the other copier ones, and like the Harry Potter game and all that crap like that, like it's just, a lot of these other companies just don't really give it the same care, or like even when like Niantic's other products, like when they work with Nintendo, they understand the significance of that. So if they stick by it and they're able to get some people who really rock with it, and some people are going to rock with it purely off the strength of the fact that like, oh, well, I like Pokemon Go, and some people are like, oh, well, I like Nintendo, or somebody's like, what are all these people walking around playing? Oh, that looks kind of fun. So I feel like this can pull from a lot of different people and see enough success, and I think it's really good timing too. We're coming up on the end of March here, so that means that this could really, depending on how quick they're able to turn this around, and it says release later this year, I would say they should aim to beat summer, if at all possible. I know that's really soon from now. That gives you April, May, maybe the first half of June. But I think by July, you want to be up and operational so you can really get that initial swell during those hot months when people are first, walking around and stuff like that. Because you got to keep in mind the vaccine's right here on the peripheral for most people at this point. And there's millions of people who are kind of back out there, and obviously the pandemic's not over, but I think this is a good time that as the society's transitioning back outside to offer something to play at the same time, I think is a really smart decision. So again, not something I'm going to play most likely, but a smart business decision for sure.
Yeah, that, like you said, the timing makes a lot of sense. The pandemic is changing to hopefully its final phase. And people are gonna start getting back out there, going to beaches and parks and everything like that. So it makes a lot of sense. I'm curious on how, because the one thing that Pokemon Go is obviously very successful with its fan base, but the microtransaction is obviously what made Niantic and Nintendo happy, was the microtransactions. So I'm wondering what they're doing or how they're gonna plan to do that, because it's not like there's Pokemon. All they had to do was keep adding Pokemon, and people would go out there, buy eggs and space and all that stuff. Pikmin only really have 7 different Pikmin, so it's not like you're gonna be collecting Pikmin or anything like that. So I don't know why my thing always goes off.
That Alexa going crazy.
She always goes off. So yeah, you're not gonna be collecting tons of Pikmin.
Yeah.
So what is it that we're gonna be buying? Ships or tools? And that's what's gonna kill it for me, because I'm not gonna pay 99 cents every other day for, I don't know, a blue ship instead of red. I'm gonna buy blue. I don't want to buy blue. Stuff like that. But we'll see. They're usually pretty smart with the way they've done it. So
yeah, it's gonna be formatted, a little bit different for sure. And monetizing the mobile space isn't something that's just always been kind of a weird thing, because it's one of those, I feel like, few places where you just can't charge up front. Or you can, but it's been so normalized not to do that, and you get people in for free and then you charge them after the fact, and that's something that doesn't work in a lot of other places. But the mobile industry, a lot of people have said race to the bottom, get cheaper, offer more and more for less and less money. So now the expectation there is even when Super Mario Run came out, it's hey, first party Nintendo, major IP, fun run game on there, $5. People are like, excuse me, $5? You might as well be making me put a mortgage on my house. The mobile game industry is just different. And so they're gonna find a way to monetize this. I just don't know how they're gonna format it, and I wouldn't even venture to say, because I don't know necessarily enough about Pikmin to say definitively where the openings are for them to put an AR game and have that steady stream of content. I have no clue. And I don't even know if necessarily they want this to have the legs as Pokemon had. I don't know. Because obviously Pokemon has that generational thing. This may be, again, they said this is not the first, but this is a series of projects that they are going to work with Niantic on. Maybe they just kind of want to release this as kind of like a one and done for people who like it. You like it, you walk around, you have fun couple months, and then on to the next project. Maybe they don't plan on supporting this in perpetuity like Pokemon. I don't know.
That's true, because they did shut down that other one, the Miiverse.
Yeah, so yeah.
The Miitomo. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess we can move on to the second story, and this is kind of like a Microsoft Discord story. So Microsoft is reportedly in exclusive talks to acquire Discord, and the deal can be completed as soon as next month. A report from the Wall Street Journal, citing people familiar with the matter, has backed up a Bloomberg report from earlier this week, which has said that Microsoft was in talks to purchase Discord for $10 billion or more, which is insane, and that Xbox boss Phil Spencer was part of the discussions. Microsoft and Discord are in exclusive talks and could complete a deal next month, assuming the negotiations don't fall apart, the article says. It also points out that the acquisition is apparently tied to Microsoft hoping to reach more consumers across both gaming and social networking. A similar drive saw Microsoft pursue an abandoned acquisition of TikTok last year. So this is very interesting, and having kind of Phil Spencer in this. So obviously this has implications not only for the Xbox wing of Microsoft, but Microsoft at large. And just having, that relationship, there's just immense money to be made. So this deal makes sense. Microsoft's burning through a lot of money recently with these major acquisitions on behalf of Xbox and stuff like that. So this makes a lot of sense to me, but this is a big freaking deal for anybody who understands kind of the general gaming ecosystem and how integral and how built in Discord is. And it's really impressive that Discord is as popular as it is, considering the fact that it is a third-party app that people kind of meet on to play other things. So a lot of them, these games don't have Discord integration. People are just bringing it along for the party because, again, it's just such a great service. So it's really impressive stuff that they were able to pull off, and it doesn't surprise me that Microsoft's trying to buy it. I'm curious to see if this sells out because, again, if Microsoft buys up something else, I mean, they're really building an insane kind of coalition of companies here under their belt. So what were your thoughts about this story?
Yeah, it's funny because I've thought for a while now that I thought one of the big three would really at least I didn't think of straight out $10 billion purchase, but I was like, someone's gonna really partner up with a Discord. Nintendo's infamously known for having just terrible party chats and that whole download the phone thing. We all know how that the Nintendo voice chat is. It's terrible. So I was like, well, one of these big three have to really integrate themselves and really partner up with that, And I even almost thought maybe Sony for a while with them shutting down their communities and all those other things that nobody used on PS4, all those features and all those bonus things that I never used either. So I thought, well, it makes sense that someone's going to kind of partner up with that. Of course, Microsoft does and will just throw money at anything and anybody, hoping it sticks. Like we said, we did see them try to purchase TikTok. That fell through. So it's been already a couple days, and this hasn't been discussed really. So this may have already fallen through, or it's on its way for final signatures and stuff. But it makes sense. Microsoft is, especially with Xbox, they're trying to make it. It's like almost like they're trying to make. It's like Microsoft's the big brother, and they're raising Xbox, And I know they're one thing, but they're like really making Xbox its own ecosystem and its own thing. So having this sort of social aspect would make sense, where people can chat, share, discuss, have all their friends, and Discord already is so integrated with so many other things. Like, as soon as I go to hit stream, somehow Discord knows I'm streaming and say, hey, you're streaming, make sure that nothing is being shown, Like, I don't do anything, and it shows me that. So before we log on this, if you're listening to Spotify, it'll tell me down to the song and how far in the song you are listening to. It shows me that. Obviously, you have your option to show me that or not, but it's so integrated, and I think that's probably what they're looking for. They're not just buying a tool; they're buying the arm that holds all the other tools, and that's how I see it. Because they're gonna just be able to scoop it up, and there's that Discord premium membership. I forgot what it's called, but having that, I don't purchase that, but of course, if that's folded into my Xbox Live or Xbox Gold, Ultimate, whatever, Xbox has that kind of pattern where it's like they'll buy something and then they integrate it into something you already own. So why would you not, if you use some reason, I don't know why you would, if someone would have used a different voice chat option right now, or just Google Hangouts and stuff like that, when you already have like the premium version of it because it's integrated into your Xbox membership, something you already pay for, then why would you not use it? Of course I would use it. So it's kind of that sort of thing to me, and it just makes a lot of sense also with them trying to do this sort of blanket coverage of PC and their console space, where it's like, we're worried about what our games are, we want you to play our games, and sort of unifying that, because through Discord you could be unifying cross-gen play between your PC players on your system, with especially Xbox Halo is going to be a huge thing where people are going to be playing, wanting, and out in with their squads and their chat and their groups and everything like that. So the timing makes sense. I don't know how exactly it'll work. I mean, of course, they could probably make a Discord app for Xbox and Microsoft Windows and install one OS. So I'm interested to see. It just makes a lot of sense. Hopefully they do it justice and not just buy it for ha-has, just to buy so no one else does.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It kind of just falls in line with their general plan. It seems like in many ways to kind of just recreate that PC experience for the console and kind of unify everything. And kind of, as you mentioned before, like the way they're going about generational upgrades and their offerings across the Xbox ecosystem and what that means for PC. Now with Discord integration, just the way they're kind of going about it is, I feel like Phil Spencer in many ways kind of looked at the PC ecosystem, looked at the console ecosystem, saw what they were doing better, and tried to find a way to kind of unite the two as a way to kind of fix Xbox. And I think so far it's working pretty well for them. We'll see, on a top level, generational level, how that plays out for them. All this money, obviously, burning through this amount of money, making all these deals, buying Bethesda and stuff like that. They're gonna need to make this back somehow. So we'll see how that plays out. I'm not a shareholder in them, so I don't know how their finances are, but they're throwing around some significant amount of money. We're talking, capital B billions for these acquisitions that they're making. And so it's great to make the great expansion, but you got to see returns. But I'm confident in their ability to do it. This is a massive corporation. They've been around for a while. They're not stupid, so Curious to see how it plays out and see if there's actually any implications for the Xbox side of things specifically, and not just kind of Microsoft at large.
Yeah, and that's obviously what speaks more to us. Is I don't own a bunch of Microsoft tablets anyway, so it's all about really what it means for Xbox. Because if you can unify and make a better, as much as I don't play online that much, if you can make it easier for me to kind of one place that, then I could start moving some of my games over onto the Xbox ecosystem, especially for fighting game communities and fighters and stuff like that to come all over to Xbox. But we'll see. All right. So the next story, one that I don't know if I've ever thought this day would come. Eventually we did, but so apparently Sony is closing the PSN stores on the PS3, PS Vita, and PSP. So Sony Interactive Entertainment is planning on pulling down the shutters on its PlayStation Store for PS3, Vita, and PSP this summer, according to the recent report by The Gamer. Speaking with sources familiar with the situation, The Gamer reports that Sony intends to close the PS3 and PSP versions of the PlayStation Store in early July before shuttering PS Vita's online store in late August. The move would prevent the future purchase of hundreds of games and DLC on these platforms, an action that can currently be completed directly through the PSN web edition of each store. It isn't clear at the time of writing whether owners will still have the option to delete, re-download their previously purchased titles at will once the supposed closure takes place. So this is a little bit more important than most people. At first, people were like, "Oh, old software, old hardware. What's the big deal?" And it's a little more complicated than that, because you gotta realize, especially I want to say halfway through each of these systems generations, Vita's almost complete life, is when they really started moving to digital libraries. And people were saying, "Why buy it physical when you can get it digital?" That was always a big thing people threw around, and this is what some of these people were worried about. And I believe it. The reason I believe this story to an extent is that Sony hasn't come out and denied it. It's been about a week, and Sony has not come out and said this is false, which means to an extent this is true. And it sucks because I do have not that much on PS3, but Vita and PSP, I do have some digital purchases that's where I own them, and that's really where they live and stand. So if they were just hit the switch and Vita memory cards are not reliable anymore, and I will run into issues eventually, and it's going to be kind of suck because these aren't accessible anywhere else. There's not another handheld where we can back this stuff up. We don't have any sort of backwards compatibility on 4 or 5 to go back to these things, and it's a sad time, and I'm hoping they come out with some more answers. The Vita story one is a little weird to me because there's so many Vita games, JRPGs that are planned for way past August to be released. So that one, maybe there's a workaround. I do understand why. PS3 came out in 2006 and we're in 2021. But they also may be seeing the numbers just aren't there. So how'd you react to this? This was a big one. This was a big shocking story.
Yeah, I mean, two of those didn't surprise me. One of them, I was like, whoa. So, yeah, PS3 and PSP, I mean, you can't expect them to keep the stores forever. So, that it didn't surprise me, especially considering the fact that we got 2 generations after the PS3 now at this point. PSP, again, came out a very long time ago, so that didn't surprise me. Vita did surprise me a little bit more because, again, they've kind of not gave up, but they've been ignoring Vita for quite some time. But they've allowed it to kind of passively exist with some passive support for quite some time now, as long as it's kind of low investment on their part. So let them keep dropping their, JRPGs. We'll keep the store up. But to close that now, too, is a definitive. It's just interesting to say, like, that era is over without a real successor at all or anything like that. It's just done. Like, it's just done. So that's really interesting. It's just a complete close on like the handheld history of Sony in any capacity. So if you want to pop that in and download something really quick, what you got is what you got at that point. So that's really interesting. The bigger implications, and this is something that a number of people have spoken about, is just that kind of close off to that backwards compatibility virtual console, whatever they set up in the past. There's 0 PlayStation 1 support on the 4 and the 5. There's very limited PlayStation 2 support. PlayStation 3, you cannot play natively. And so with them closing that off in terms of digital offering, it's gone. That's it. You're pretty much locked to PlayStation Now and current games from like PS4 and PS5. So there are like broader implications here where they kind of spent all this time creating this awesome library where you can play these games digitally and really explore the heritage of a lot of these franchises that still exist to these days. So you can, buy and download cheap PS1 games and experience them. And they've just completely abandoned that model. And with it, at this point, it seems like one company is the only one who doesn't really have an aversion to allowing people to play older games on newer consoles with relative ease, and that's Xbox. Nintendo has offered solutions that are definitely subpar. Obviously, some of the first-party stuff are released through that kind of, NES online thing, SNES online thing. But it seems like generally, a lot of these companies just, maybe they have the metrics to support it where like these people are not really playing it that much, so why go through it? But it's just a real shame to see them shutter these stores with no real alternatives. You know what I mean? Like if I want to play a first party, like if I want to play Metal Gear Solid 1 and I have PS5 sitting there, what do? Nothing really.
Yeah, can't.
Nothing. You could. There's no PS4 collection. There's no PS5 collection. There's stuff on PlayStation now. If you don't have the Wi-Fi infrastructure to support that, because it's only streaming games for specifically PS3, you can download PS4, but you can't properly download PS3. Like, this is an issue when you get rid of something with no solution. To me, that's just lowering value proposition. That's kind of just needlessly shutting parts of your past off. When there are people who would love to experience that, and I feel like Xbox has offered an elegant solution, which is like, yeah, put the disc in. Just put the disc in. That's it. No big deal. But for some reason, PlayStation has this weird aversion to it. Where it's like people don't play old games. People don't care about old games. They're ugly. Well, I don't know where this thinking came from, but it seems like something they still latch to. And so this decision didn't surprise me. The way they've talked about their older generations have been in line with this. So for them to kind of shut down these stores with no but don't worry, all these games will be available on the PlayStation 5. Nope. It's just like, yeah, it's kick rocks basically. Figure it out. Find a physical. But which sucks because especially if somebody likes to buy things above grade and from the source themselves, there's no real option for that. You can just you either buy an old console and buy the game secondhand, which a lot of these games are relatively accessible. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. But yeah, for the most part, you kind of just shit out of luck in that regard. So yeah, it's a shame, but it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I've just recently hooked up my PS3 to play PS2 games actually, but and I was curious and I went to the PSN store and it is really bad. It's super slow. Yeah, it's super slow and it's weird, but it shows like the top selling PS3 games and stuff like that. So it almost did look like it was in its final stages, where it's like obviously they're not releasing any new PS3 games and stuff like that, but there was like almost like no care to it. Like it runs terrible, but that's also a little bit to the hardware too, because the PS3 in general runs terrible. It runs pretty bad. It runs really slow. But again, this is 14, 15-year-old hardware at the time, so I'm just, I guess, for the Vita one, I don't. It's weird. The Vita one would be less of a hit if we had another handheld, in a sense. And they're like, we're killing off our two oldest systems right now, the PS3 and PSP. Because here's PS4. But what's the big one that you said is that we don't have any sort of thing. Like, there's no way to play these games now unless you have to start going to retro stores and stuff like that, like you said. And they're not gaining money that way. So I'm hoping this comes with some sort of announcement of some sort of collection. I don't know what to expect. I expect nothing from them. I expect them to come out. I get
that's what
them.
I was gonna say. Don't expect nothing.
I think is I get some of their stuff where they're like, there was that interview with, I don't remember who it was. He's like, you guys really want to go back and play Gran Turismo 3? And I'm like, I get that. We don't want to play Gran Turismo 3. We want to go play Metal Gear Solid 1. I don't want a collection with Gran Turismo 1 through 7 on it.
Yeah, summarize that entire generation through Gran Turismo 3. That's how you summarize it.
It's it's like, I don't want the PS collection and it's like, yeah, here's MLB The Show from this year to this year, and that's my issue with EA, the EA Play thing in the Game Pass. You have like you have Madden like 14 through 2021. I'm like, who wants to play these? Give us the newest one or the last year's one. I get, but those are the things. But now we won't be able to play like unless you own Twisted Metal, the reboot on PS3 physical, which I think I do. If you don't own it there, then you won't play. Because I don't even think you got to remember some titles for PS3 were never released digital. You know, this was before the age of day one. Games were coming out physical and digital. Some of them came after, some never came. So it's kind of saddening. It's like it's sad, not that they're just shutting down, but it's sad because now this is stuff that's going to be lost. Now, you know, this is going to lead to a big homebrew thing. This is going to lead to a lot of guys working on emulators and hacking and things like that, which Sony hates so much, but you're not giving us you're not giving us another option.
Yeah, it's a Nintendo problem. They're like, don't pirate our games, but we're never going to re-release them. So, like, I don't get that logic, but it's stupid. Like, again, if there's a demand for a product and you don't want it to exist illegally, provide a legal option, and there's the end of your problem. But I don't know, they don't.
Sad. Unfortunate. It's very unfortunate.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's like, PlayStation 1 games, who wants to play that? What do you want to play, Qbert? And it's like, I mean, do you realize, like, there's, like, better games on that console?
Yeah.
I don't know. Sony's weird about that stuff. I feel like it's one of those things where they have this thing where it's like, if we're not doing it, it doesn't matter. And they do that. They've done that for a long time. Where it's like, if PlayStation doesn't care about, like, crossplay. We don't do crossplay, so crossplay doesn't matter. We don't do backwards compatibility, so backwards compatibility doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that Xbox and Nintendo, when they've done it, have seen immense success with it. No, it doesn't matter because we're not doing it. And so it just seems like one of those things where it's like closing off the PS3 store and all the Vita and all that. Yeah, who cares? Because we don't care about it. It doesn't matter. So, yeah, and it's like some weird shadow government waving their hand in front of your face being like, we tell you what matters. Only PS5 matters. And it's like, oh, thank you for that. I guess I'll go back to my Xbox and play old Mass Effect then. Exactly. Old crappy Mass Effect, apparently. So, last story of the day, a really interesting development with Ghost of Tsushima possibly getting a movie with a whole director and everything. So, Sony Pictures and PlayStation Productions are developing a film adaptation of Ghost of Tsushima with the John Wick director, Chad Stahelski, sorry if I butchered that name, attached to the helm. According to a new report from Deadline, Stahelski, that's going to mess me up, will work alongside producers Alex Young and Jason Spitz for their company 8711 Entertainment. Peter Kang of game developer Sucker Punch Productions will oversee the project on behalf of the studio, which will serve as the executive producers. The film is set to adapt Ghost of Tsushima's story, which follows the journey of samurai warrior Jin Sakai as he fights for the freedom of the Isle of Tsushima. We're excited to be partnering with Chad and 8711 Entertainment to bring their vision of Jin's story to the big screen, said Assad Kizilbash, head of PlayStation Productions. We love working with creative partners like Chad who have the passion for our games, ensuring we can create rich adaptations that will excite our fans and new audiences. So this is very interesting development. So this is something we kind of knew was coming, not specifically this movie, but the fact that PlayStation Productions was getting a concerted effort into the movie industry. So we knew that was coming. And Ghost of Tsushima is kind of the natural place to go from there. So I have some positive thoughts I'll just get out really quick. So first off, Ghost of Tsushima, already incredibly cinematic. And so that is both a pro and a con. So it's a pro, that means that I feel like this would be a very natural transition to having a dedicated movie. But also, that means that the standards are incredibly high because the game itself is so cinematic, so based on these classic samurai movies from like the 60s and 70s. And so if they're going to make a proper movie, it's got to be done with incredible finesse, incredible high standards of quality. The writing has to be there, and specifically that cinematography has to be up, and the choreography has to be amazing too. Which makes me happy that they're bringing the John Wick guy in, because in terms of modern action movies go, that has some of the best action choreography I've seen in my life, to be honest with you. So it makes me glad that they have somebody from John Wick coming onto this movie. You guys already know I'm not the biggest fan of adapting like anime, cartoons, games into movies. It's just not. I prefer when like mediums are just allowed to prosper in their own medium personally. But I see some good names I like that Sucker Punch is going to be involved with it in some capacity. And so I just hope that this gets the care that it deserves, and that they understand the fact that if you're not going to do this right, don't do it at all. So I'm like cautiously optimistic. This makes me feel a lot better than some of the other things. This is kind of like, for me, put on the same level as like The Last of Us. Like, I see some good things, I see the right names, and so right now there's nothing that's screaming out to me that there's going to be trash. But again, that might be famous last words. What is your thoughts?
Yeah, we knew obviously PlayStation was moving along with some of the stuff. They just came out and talked about the Twisted Metal is actually in full production eventually, or something like that, and Last of Us, Uncharted movies done, I guess, so that'll be something. So Yikes. This is one I didn't, this is not one I necessarily expected, due to the fact that it is still very new, a brand new IP. I understand the cultural effect. I know that they gave Sucker Punch like a bunch of like honorary stuff for like popularizing Tsushima and stuff like that. I don't remember exactly what it was that they gave, but the people in charge of Tsushima, like, all these governors and people like were like super happy with the way the game was and stuff like that. So it makes sense that they're doing this, and it makes sense because it's such a new IP that we only have this game to judge it on. We don't have like a series of it and things like that. And I'm hoping, and as I guess we'll see when they start getting some cast lists and stuff like that, is it going to be like, Last of Us, where it's like, well, this is the best case scenario. We have Druckmann on, and we have all these guys, and they're going to be, they're obviously going to have sit downs with Troy Baker and everyone like that. It's like this one's like, well, are they going to, hopefully they give the guy who played Jin a shot, because he is an actor. He was in The Man in the High Castle.
Yeah.
So hopefully they at least give him a shot. He's not like he's super old. He's like 30. He's got to be in his 30s, that guy.
Yeah, mid-30s probably.
So it's not like, and that, to me, that's kind of where Jim would be. Also, it's gritty. He's gonna be wearing masks and stuff like that. So it's not like they're not, hopefully not worried about that. So at least give him a shot, because that would be their best option. Obviously, the guy who did the motion capture, did the face animation, like how much better could you do that? That'd be the ideal situation. So yeah. I'm excited, but again, but the thing is, like, Sony's producing all these stuff, and we have yet to see them hit anything successful yet. Like, we haven't gotten any of this stuff. I'm like, why are you, like, let's launch a show for everything? I'm like, what if it all is garbage? And I doubt it, and I think there'll be some shining moments, but let's take it one thing at a time. But so far, it looks like they are setting it up with care by getting people from Sucker Punch and being like, hey, let's do this, but obviously let's do it respectfully. You guys nailed it for the game. The game could have came out and been super disrespectful, garbage, and terrible. So now, like, let's help direct us in the same aspect. So I'll keep my eye on it. I'm just nervous about it.
Yeah, it's just like, as you were talking, I was just thinking about certain moments when I was playing Ghost of Tsushima, where you're kind of just sitting on the hills and you see the way the leaves work, are like swaying in the wind. And you get these these directional changes with the way the wind works, and these insane color palettes when you go somewhere, and the way the sun's pouring in. It's so visually stunning, and it's such a like trippy, almost like a mythological way that they went around the visual style, where it's like hyper realistic, but in a way that you would imagine some kind of mythological land based around Japanese mythology would look. And especially like when you go into the forest and you see the little fox spirits running around and stuff like that. And I was like, I just can't possibly see how they could properly recreate that with live action. You know what I mean? Without it looking too like computerized. You know what I mean? Or too weird filter on it. Like, they got a tough time ahead of them. And again, I have faith right now because I want to go in with a positive mind. But it's one of those things where I don't see how this could possibly outdo the game. And so if you can't really outdo the game and you're not going to take the visual styles, then you're kind of just running into a relatively conventional samurai story that we've gotten a million times. So it's kind of a tricky balance of like, how do you adapt? How do you make a movie about a video game that's based on movies? You know what I mean? It's just one of those tricky things. And not to mention the movies that are it's based on are like the most classic of classics of movies that are like you're not gonna outdo. Period. That you're not gonna outdo that. So it's like, how do you do this? I don't know. I'm not in charge of it, but we'll see. We'll see. I try to remain optimistic and not crap on them ahead of time. But I do like to make a differentiation between like what like Last of Us is doing and maybe Twisted Metal and maybe this and what Uncharted is. Uncharted is going to be a heap of crap, and yes. I already know that.
Yeah. Uncharted, again, that's been in development hell for so long. It was not being produced the way they want to produce.
Yeah.
Twisted Metal, they're lucky, is kind of like so obscure enough where they can do whatever they want with Twisted Metal, and people will be like, all right, dumb fun. Last of Us, obviously, different. Also, Ghost of Tsushima, there's a lot of story in there to try to do in, 2 hours? Because this is not a series. They're talking about a movie.
Proper movie, yeah.
A proper movie, so what you need to see... There's a lot to see
things would have to get cut, for sure.
In Jin's story. So things would have to get cut, and then that's going to lose the effect. You can't just hit the light switch and make Jin become Ghost of Tsushima, because it takes a while before he actually takes that mantle. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, the game itself is actually broke into, like, 2 major acts anyways.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if they maybe only adapt the first act. You wouldn't get the whole story, but they would leave it closer to I believe it ends on, like, between the acts, kind of a low moment for Jin. And it's kind of like a, what do you call it, a cliffhanger. Mm-hmm. So that might actually be a place to end it. And then that'll just incentivize them to make Ghost of Tsushima, too. Just an idea. I don't know.
Well, hopefully they do it well.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, they got the budget, so they should make it work. Loose topic time now. So we've done a series twice now where we talk about a franchise or a game that elicits a lot of feelings in us, and there's a lot to unpack there, and it's too much to just talk about in passing. It needs its own dedicated segment. And this is going to be an extra tricky one because this is a franchise that not only has been around for a really long time, but has evolved countless times. And it can be broken into specific segments. So this week, we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy. Now, for the sake of time and not spending a day and a half on this topic, let's just keep it to the mainline 15. 16's not out yet, so mainline 15 for the sake of just making our lives a little earlier, maybe with small exception with like some of the direct tie-ins. So I'm thinking 13.2 and 3. I'm thinking Crisis Core maybe, and some of the 7 integrations, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But for the most part, other than that, let's just try to keep it the linear 15. So this is a franchise that you can go back to the NES on, and it's pretty much touched everything since that point. It's still going to this day. I would say if you want to break it into its kind of eras, you got kind of 1 through 6. I think 7 through 9 are the PS1 era where they added like an active element to the battle system. Then 10 was an evolutionary step where a lot of the previous people left and new people jumped on. And I feel like 10 to 15 are definitely kind of kindred spirits with one another in terms of like kind of a more modern approach to RPGs. But some people like to just break it into 2 segments. You got 1 through 9, 10 through 15. So you could break it up different ways. And it's very divisive because there's people who jumped in. For example, I know a lot of people our age who jumped in at 10. And so they really love 10, 12, 13. Some of them love 15. Some of them are playing 14 now. But if you go back before them, with exception maybe for 7, they don't really rock too much with the previous ones. Then there are people who grew up with it, and they don't want to touch anything after 6. There are some people who came in through the PS1 era. That's me, who really love 7 and 9. Some people really love 8. So everybody seems to have their own kind of favorite style of Final Fantasy and what Final Fantasy means to them. And then there are some people who literally do love every single one. And God bless you if you can do that. So I guess a great place to start is, when I say Final Fantasy, where does your mind go? Because that's a great starting point, and that tells me a lot about what your style game is. So when I say, Steve, Final Fantasy, what do you think of?
So it's tough because I also do split them up pretty much similar to you.
Yeah.
So when I hear Final Fantasy, I think Final Fantasy 6, 9, and 13.
Okay.
Those are the ones that just stick out to me. In each of that, for their own reasons and stuff like that. I was exposed to Final Fantasy with Final Fantasy 7. Was the first time I ever saw Final Fantasy in general. I didn't get to go back till later on when I got PSPs and stuff like that. So for that traditional RPG, Final Fantasy VI is still even now one of like my favorite Final Fantasy games. Like the day they remake that one honorably, I will lose my mind. But that's what calls out to me, just because of how iconic those were. And 7 obviously was the introduction to me. It's what I saw, spiky blonde anime guy. Around the time I was watching anime, so it's like all kind of spoke. Here's this oversized sword that nobody could ever actually hold, and just this cool sort of punk aesthetic that they had. 13 sticks out to me just because that was the one I was able to jump into day one with the world, obviously, and stuff like that. So when someone hits, when I hear that Final Fantasy, those are the 3 that stick out to me.
Got you. Yeah. So for me, my entry point was also 7. I remember playing 9 pretty close to it as well. I remember renting 8 and just like when I remember renting it, I'm like, I don't know how to play this. Like I was just too young, so I was like, I don't know what the hell to do with this. So and I was really, really young at these points. And then by the time I got a little bit older and I got a PSP, as you mentioned, that's when I got to experience a lot of the previous thing. Also, they had the Game Boy Advanced re-released versions.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
So I played the hell out of 5 and 6. And then I played the PSP versions of the remakes of 1 through 3, if you remember those. So my entire childhood is pretty much kind of that first half of Final Fantasy and playing all of that. So when everybody else was like on PS2 playing Final Fantasy X, I didn't really want no parts of that, to be honest with you, at the time, because I just loved the previous one so much. So when I dabbled with 10, I'm like, I don't know what all this is. When you guys are playing Blitzballs, I'm like, I don't know what this is. Like, I don't want to do this.
Swimming.
And I remember around the same time, Kingdom Hearts was also kind of popping up too. Mm-hmm. So I was like, if I want this experience, I'm just going to play Kingdom Hearts, to be honest with you. So I didn't really go through 10 until, the show existed when I played 10, and I told you all about that. So that was a wild ride for me to experience so retroactively. So when people say Final Fantasy, to me, my mind goes to 7 and 9. Definitely first, and then kind of also 6 lingering there too. I don't really think about anything after 10. Not that I'm saying that I don't consider it Final Fantasy. It's just not what my mind goes to, because that's not something I experienced until, relatively recently, to be honest with you. So I guess the natural and one of the most difficult question is, you have to choose one Final Fantasy game that's your favorite, and that's the only one you could play. Which one do you choose?
If I had to just do one and that was it, like that's the one, I have to default to Final Fantasy 9.
Oh, okay.
Which, I talk Final Fantasy 6 up a lot. I really like Final Fantasy 6. But, 9, I do enjoy 7. I do think for what it is slightly overhyped. The world out there, don't get me wrong, I understand it. I understand why it's really cool. I loved Final Fantasy 7 Remake, don't get me wrong. I see what the aesthetic is there. But the, clunkiness of it, the timing when it was released and stuff like it, I'm looking at its purest form, not the world that it brought us to and stuff like that. So when I'm looking at a full title, Final Fantasy 9 just speaks to me. I don't really know what it was that it was. I don't know if it was just that's the game, that I was just enamored with. But I just like the characters a lot better. I think they're a little bit more unique than Final Fantasy 7. So, and I compare it a lot to Final Fantasy 7 because I really don't enjoy Final Fantasy 8 and I don't enjoy Final Fantasy 10. I've tried that game multiple times. I don't like it. And what gets me are the characters. I don't think Squall's a good character. I don't think Cloud is really anything special either. Him and Squall and Cloud are like the same sort of I wear black and don't talk to me sort of deal. And then you get to the vibrantness that is Final Fantasy 9. You see, Zidane's while he's running around, he's got a monkey tail. It's like, here's Vivi, who looks like obviously a default mage from all the other games, but like let's give them character, let's give them all these other things, and it's just that world felt like what Final Fantasy should be, and that's my thing, is that I know each person has their own Final Fantasy, and Final Fantasy changes from time to time, and I'm okay with the steampunk, and I'm okay with the sort of new techy stuff, maybe not like Final Fantasy 15, but something about it sort of returning to its roots in Final Fantasy IX is just where I feel the most comfortable, and I feel like it's a natural expansion from like 6 to 9. You know, is where just you can see that it's still Final Fantasy.
Yeah, definitely. I feel, and you raised a great point specifically with going back to its roots with 9, because I feel like, again, 9 has a spiritual connection to specifically 1 through 5, if anything, because 6 is obviously a massive a shift from there stylistically. So yeah, no, I also would have said 9 for many years. To be honest, replaying all of them relatively recently, including 1 through 5 that I dabbled with as well, I probably have to still choose 6, and that for me is there's a couple of reasons. One thing, I feel like it brings forward the heritage of the ones that came before it in a perfect way. It's classic turn-based. It has that beautiful pixel art that I just love. Love the steampunk aesthetic. And the reason I feel like I can love the steampunk aesthetic so much is because I don't feel like it got overdone. I could see definitely if there was like a million more after that point that really dabbled too hard in that specific aesthetic, I'd probably be like, man, I've turned off from it. But I feel like they each are different enough, and I feel like 7 did a different enough type of steampunk. Again, it's a darker like almost post-apocalyptic looking steampunk with 7 that you get, as opposed to this kind of post-magic road that you get in 6. And what I loved about 6 is just kind of how ballsy it was at that time, where you keep in mind 1 through 5, you got high fantasy at that point. And then you kind of go to 6 where it's like magic is scarce in this world, where like technology has taken over. And that switch at that time was just insane. Especially, you go back now, especially once you look at like 13 and 15, where that integration between tech and magic, I feel like, has been really perfected from an aesthetic standpoint. That wasn't the case back then, really, coming off of that kind of almost Tolkien-esque kind of fantasy, with mages and knights and dragons and all that stuff, and to kind of come off of that and just be like, we have mech suits, and this is supposed to be the 6th entry of a franchise. That's just insane. Keep in mind, in America, this was the 3rd entry too, so they had even less to pull off of. So it was just a bold decision that I feel like I still really respect, and kind of going back, I just have a lot of fun with it, and I just love the designs. I felt like it's been criminally underserved, as opposed, 7's getting the proper remake. They've gotten re-releases on Switch and all that stuff like that, but for some reason those ones before, and then they've remade the originals on like PSP, for example, and stuff like that. But when you get to like 6, for some reason, with the exception for like a Game Boy Advance re-release, and like if you go on Steam right now, they like messed up all the assets because Square Enix tries to clean these things up and makes it hideous. For the most part, they haven't really touched this game that much, which is surprising, because again, they have that really interesting foray into 3D, because it was like transitioning into that kind of PlayStation 1 era. It wasn't there yet, but at the same time still holds 2D pixel art. So it has a really interesting aesthetic, and the kind of thing that rolls through my head is specifically that opening sequence of 6, where you see the mech suits walking through the like winter storm, and you kind of have the world kind of rolling. So they're like playing around with 3D elements. So it's just so much interesting visual things that they did with it, and so many interesting narrative choices that they made with it, that I definitely go towards 6 now. But for many years I would have gone through 9, because I feel like that's the perfect encapsulation of like Final Fantasy meets that Disney aesthetic of that time, but while holding that kind of darkness that Final Fantasy always brings into things that I really liked. So we've talked a lot about that kind of pre-10 era and how much love we have for that. But I think we'd be remiss not to talk about kind of our childhood forward, in terms of chronologically timeline, not necessarily what we experienced, but what came out at that point. So 10 and onwards. You said you didn't like 10 very much, but I know you're a massive fan of 13. So modern Final Fantasy isn't something you necessarily turned off from, right?
No, not at all. So for the moderns, so again, I remember when Final Fantasy X came out. Everyone at the time, it was called Final Fantasy X, whatever it was. So it came out, and my brother had gotten it. He was a huge Final Fantasy fan, and I do owe him some credit that he was the one who sort of kept introducing me to this stuff. I didn't have a PS2, so he was the one who I don't know, borrow it. I don't know what he would do. That he would show up with these games. So, and I remember watching him. I remember watching him do the level up system, which is that orb thing. You gotta connect them. And I'm like, huh. And I don't know if it's just because at the time I just didn't understand it. And I'm like, why does this look so complicated? For just because to make itself stand out. I'm like, it is what it is. And I watched him play different parts, and I know we always hit with the we come at that all the time. I understand that scene is supposed to be like that. Don't get me wrong. I just think that the sort of comic relief it was going for did not land. I don't think Titus is. He's almost seems like he's a response to what everyone was down about for Cloud and Squall. I think, and again, that's just my opinion. Everyone has their own opinion. But it's rare when I find someone who says Titus is their favorite character.
They're out there, though.
Don't get me wrong. I know they're out there. I made the mistake one time. I didn't work at GameStop, but I was at GameStop, and I was like, no, I don't like Final Fantasy X. Or I think the HD remakes were coming out.
Oh, you can't say that.
Not. Yeah, and I said, oh, that game's not for... I said, that's not a real Final Fantasy game or something like that. And some dude wearing a fedora went off on me, and I was just like, hold on. Because he thought I didn't like Final Fantasy at all. And I was like, let's take it easy here. But there's just, I don't know what it is about the world. I think I don't think the introduction is done very well. I think it's done very slow. I think they try to get cinematic and I'm also a huge thing. I don't know what it is in video games when I have to play a game or a level or a stage that's me underwater. I hate it. And the whole chunk of that beginning of Final Fantasy X, actually the whole game, there's just water. It's just like constantly water. Then you got the blitzball thing that doesn't really make sense to me and stuff like that. And I've given it a shot. So to me, just Final Fantasy X does not land. The gameplay doesn't. The actual fighting is fine, but the level up mechanics makes no sense to me. It doesn't feel like it's supposed to. It just doesn't feel like a Final Fantasy. It does feel like an RPG. Don't get me wrong. But the characters, the aesthetic, the weird clothing, like there's nothing about that world that calls to me. And I guess it's just my taste.
Yeah, it's tricky. So I'm someone who experienced it later, so I got to use my modern lens with it. With the HD remaster, I played maybe what was like a year and a half ago, maybe that I played that a year and a half ago. And so it's one of those things where I like it? Not necessarily, but I do respect it quite a bit, and I respect what they're trying to do there. And I respect people's love for that because I know a lot of people are nostalgic for it. And I get why they like it because I played through it myself with help of my girlfriend. We kind of, went through it and experienced it front to back. And I think the narrative is very interesting. It's very unique, especially considered. I really do respect them kind of coming in and look kind of not rejecting everything it's set up to do, but do something completely different. Where it's like, okay, we're in a brand new console here with the PlayStation 2. We have brand new writers, brand new developers. We're starting a new era. So let's deviate as much as possible to make a clear delineation between what Final Fantasy was and what we would what we think it can be is basically what I look at that game as. And so it's one of those things where it's like I enjoyed moments of it. Again, not the aesthetic for me. The water thing for you. Like it's not for me, but I think there is a lot to like there. I don't think it's like a meritless game. Certainly like with like character design, I think there's some really interesting thing. The voice acting is really off-putting, but I think there's some really interesting stuff, especially what they do, and I forget what they called, but they're basically their mages in those worlds. The whole kind of cultural elements and the temple design and everything like that, I really, really do quite like what they did there. Now, once you get to 10-2, you've completely lost me. I gave that game a shot, not for me. But it did get to the point where like I respected it so much that I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna buy a copy of this game because I think they did some interesting enough things that I want in my collection. And so for many years growing up, I was like, I don't know what the hell that is. I don't want any parts of it, and so I never played it. Mm-hmm. And so I played it when I got older, and just giving it a shot front to back. I still don't like it, but I respect the hell out of it now, if that makes any sense, because I get what they were trying to do, and I understand why so many people, especially if they were growing up and younger at that point, and maybe that was their first Final Fantasy, could look at that as kind of like an amazing bar, an amazing experience for them. I can 100% get it. especially the way the world that is designed. It's just a really fun place to kind of run around. And that's kind of just my opinion on it. So I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you whatsoever. I'm just kind of adding context to like the nuance of how I feel about it, if that makes any sense.
No, that's true, and that's the thing. I get why people like the game, and I do feel like I do need to give it another shot. 'Cause I feel like every time I've given it a shot, it's either after I've played something else, it's either that I'm anticipating something else, and whatever have you. I think I just need a weekend when I'm not doing nothing. I have a flight coming up soon, so maybe then. But it's not that long of a flight, so that I'm just, it's me and Final Fantasy X. That's it.
I think you'll get a kick out of it. I do think you will.
I do. Maybe it's on sale on Switch. I'll check it. The X's came out on Switch, correct?
Yes, that's where I played it. So
yeah, I'm just trying to think of the best place for me to. Well, the easiest place for me to play it. I will give it a shot, and if I ever do change my mind, I will come on here and no problem be like, you know what, guys, I was wrong about this. I like this part. I'm not saying it will happen, but I'm optimistic.
Yeah, so after that point, they made a really interesting decision. They really, really experimented with what it meant to be Final Fantasy. So 11 is an MMO. I believe it's still active, but it doesn't get necessarily... Or maybe they just shut it down. I remember seeing a headline not too long ago about it. It's definitely like all the people who are interested in online Final Fantasy are obviously on 14 now. Yep. Which came out botched, and they have since fixed it, so that has become its own beast. And that, if anything, of any of these games are probably still the most active right now, obviously because it's an online game. But then 12 is interesting because they took like an MMO gameplay style and put it into a single player experience. So I always draw this. It's funny. If you find somebody who really loves 14 and plays the hell out of 14 right now and are pretty familiar with Final Fantasy, ask them what they think about 12, because 10 out of 10 times they always love 12, because I feel like that's kind of like a nice... It's Final Fantasy single player foray into MMOs. I loved the aesthetic of 12 more so than I liked the gameplay style when it came out back in the day. I remember playing the hell out of this demo and be like, this game is beautiful. It looks really serious and awesome, and I like it. But the gameplay style is not really my cup of tea. What do you think? Because Broken Age came out since then, so they're obviously still showing love to it. There's still a demand for this. So
yeah, so Final Fantasy 12 and 14, 12 and 11. I mean, wait, hold on, I'm confused now. 11 was the other RPG one, right?
Yeah, it was
the
MMO.
The MMO. Yeah. So 11 and 12 obviously do have that connection aesthetically and everything like that. 12, I can't say too much about because it is the one I have the least experience with. And not even, it's just I haven't played it that much. I remember playing, a demo it came out with. I don't remember what the demo came with, and I played it, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. It had a lot of aesthetics that remind me of like 9 and obviously everything before 6 and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. It looked very knightish, and armored people almost look like, at the time, we played Kingdom Hearts, so it looked like some of the armored people from Kingdom Hearts and some of the secret cutscenes and stuff like that. So it felt like it was there. I can't, besides that, I can't say too much. I understand a little bit of the characters. I know Vaughn, and I know that. I don't, from what I've seen and remember playing it, the growth system wasn't the best to me. That's like that weird checkerboard, right? That's the one with the checkerboard level up system. So, because every time like you level up, they set up you get the experience from defeating the enemies, and then you can do that to change your all the stats and stuff that are in there. So it's not one that I can't speak too much about. Not that I don't like it. I feel like this game would probably be one of my tops if I enjoyed. If I got to sit down and play it. It's just, it's been something that's just sort of been. I have yet to have. Game Pass.
If you ever wanted to mess around with it, it is on Game Pass because I think it's one of the more interesting ones to go back to for sure.
Yeah. I have to, and maybe I'll do that as well. Just give it on Game, because once I'll try it on Game Pass, and if I can co-sign it, then I'll restart it on Switch or something like that. But it is one that it's called to me for a while, especially, and it's funny that you're mentioning the MMO stuff, where I do play Final Fantasy. I know we haven't gotten there yet, but Final Fantasy 14, I do play that, not as religiously as some of these other people, and I see so much of it when I go back and see the trailers for 12 and the remake of 12, the Zodiac Age.
It's in there, man.
and it's
like Zodiac Age, not Broken Age. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, Zodiac Age. I'm like, wow, it's definitely something there, and 12 also felt like it was around for so long, because I remember they did a sequel spin-off for DS, which I never played, but there's a DS, like, I don't know if it's a sequel or a spin-off.
I know which one you're talking about too. Yeah.
So, let me look it up real quick. Revenant Wings.
Okay.
Which, again, I don't even know what the gameplay battle system is for this. If I remember, this is an RTS one, which is why I never played it, because RTSs with me are really strange relationship. But everything else about this game speaks to me. I like the whole pirate theme, well, the sky pirate theme, commanding the airship and everything like that. Like, all that stuff is just so Final Fantasy to me, and it's bizarre that I'm like, why haven't I played this? Why aren't I a huge 12 fan? And it hasn't hit for me yet, and that's why I'm glad that these games still exist in you forever, because they always keep being brought back and stuff like that. So it's like, I will give this one a shot soon. But what I've seen, looks like I will enjoy it, and I know it's rough to say that, it does look like a Final Fantasy.
Definitely. And it's one of those weird things where I feel like that kind of 11, 12 era is just an era that people don't talk about a lot. It is kind of a forgotten era. They talk the hell out of like the 7 to 10 era. They talk a lot, obviously, about 13 to 15, but there's that kind of middle zone there where there was kind of like a lull where it's not that Final Fantasy wasn't popular, but just people don't revisit it and talk about it as much. And I think there's a lot of interesting narrative things that they did back then. Specifically, I think it's one of the most impactful era to kind of alley-oop them and set them up for where they're at right now with 14. Where I feel like a lot of the legwork of setting up 14 was done back then. So that's a very interesting thing. And then obviously going forward from that point, we got 13 and onwards. I feel like 13 and 15 are definitely like the modern era of it. 13 is also something I experienced retroactively. I played that not too long ago. The whole paradigm shifting thing was like tough for me at first. I just have a lot of tough time like adapting to these new RPG styles as opposed to like the old Final Fantasy, the just kind of classic turn-based, cheer, boosting, like all those classic moves, and then understanding elements in relation. I can do all that. It's just the sequencing of these newer games are a little bit tougher for me. And 15 is a full active game. We've talked about that. But 13 is a very unique thing because this one got a trilogy. And this is one that I feel like a lot of people started with them. And by the time Lightning Returns came out, it was like a very specific niche audience who like loved the hell out of that franchise. And it's really interesting because, again, like a lot of people fell off, but it didn't die. It got 3 games. And to this day, people really hold on to that. And so it's a really interesting thing where I feel like for all the Final Fantasy games, with its fans and detractors, people genuinely, even if it's not their favorite, they understand about it. Like, oh, I might not like 8, but like I get it. I know what's going on there. Where like 13, I feel like there's like an insularity to it, where it's like not only do people not really know what it turned into, but like people don't know the characters. Like people like they know lightning, they know snow, and then they're like, I don't know what the hell goes on after the first game. So it's a really interesting franchise. I'd love for you to speak about it because you're one of the few people I feel like that really kind of saw it from beginning to end, or at least tried all 3 games.
Yeah. So this one, I remember when they announced Final Fantasy 13. There was this. My parents used to have this cable box, and like you could go pick through channels. So they had an entertainment section that would go to watch like free. I don't know if it was IGN at the time or Machinima, whoever was doing these weird shows that would go direct to TV guide and stuff like that. So I would watch it. I would watch this trailer constantly, and I'm like, wow, this looks great. The cyber sort of aesthetic of it. I'm like, it's so different that I get it. We're on the cusp of. This was going to be the next, and it was the next Final Fantasy game on the new systems. It was the only one because Final Fantasy 12, I believe, was 06, which was right before 360 and PS3 was coming out and stuff like that, which may have actually been what hurt it just a slight bit because
true, good observation.
Yeah. So maybe I don't know statistically, but it was in that weird position where. For us, I think it was 2010 when Final Fantasy 13 came out, and I remember that's one of the first things I scrunched up money to do it, and I was like, well, I gotta I gotta play Final Fantasy 13, because Final Fantasies have always been like staples. Like when Final Fantasy comes out, it's like everyone's playing that game, and it's always been this big monumental moment. So I do remember starting it, and I remember being blown away by the graphics, and even now those games still artistically look very solid and stuff like that. And I do remember trying it. I'm like, okay, and I remember playing it. I'm like, okay, I was immediately actually kind of turned off by Lightning's character. I was like, wow, they really pushed the female Cloud aspect. I'll be honest.
Like, she really is very much a soldier. Yeah,
she's just a soldier. Don't talk to me. I don't want to talk about anything. Yeah, you're a guy who has a chocobo coming out of his head. I'm not gonna act like I see it. And that whole thing is her thing. And obviously they changed it a little bit later. But then I'm not gonna sit here and pretend we're not gonna talk about the game being a hallway simulator.
Yeah, or at least the first one. Yeah,
at least the first one. I'll break them up. Final Fantasy 13, the pure one. Obviously, a bulk of that game is really showing about how pretty the game looks, and then the combat is really what they focused on, because everything else is just long hallways. It's just long stretches, and they open up in some sections, and I know near end game it opens up to the small open world, but I think people were so used to sort of having a little bit more freedom, and they were obviously going for more of a science fantasy structure, like structured story in Final Fantasy 13, and that's where people sort of were like, that's where it started making this division, where people were like, I don't want to walk around this place called Cocoon if you're not going to let me actually explore Cocoon and stuff like that. And the combat, I think, is solid. I do think the paradigm thing, at least for me at that age, I mean, that was, I don't even remember how old I was. I mean, I was in
high school, right?
High school somewhere, so it did seem really complicated, where it's like, well, to hit this enemy, you got to switch to this paradigm and stance, so this person can hit this one, but this one can hit this one. And I'm like, can I just kill this guy and run through the next hallway? And so there has their issues. But I do just like a lot of the stuff that other people hate. Again, it's a sort of taste. The whole story of the Lassie or the Lucille and all that stuff, and what it means to be marked, and the powers you have, the powers you don't have, and who is what. It all makes weird. At this time, you can remember I've been following, Kingdom Hearts, which has a crazy story. We've talked about that. So all these like things that they were bringing up made sense to me. And so I can barely remember the ending of Final Fantasy 13. I don't even really remember what goes on, but I do remember just being encapsulated by that world. And I think part of it was that I was forcing myself to play this game to the point I liked it because everyone else was talking about this game, so I didn't want to be left behind. So obviously then we get Final Fantasy 13-2, and that is, most people can admit that Final Fantasy 13-2 is a good RPG. It's interesting. It's called 13-2, and you don't play as Lightning. It's a sequel to 13, but you don't play as the same main character. You play obviously as her sister, and I can't remember his name. I think it was like Noah or something. But you play as two characters, and it's funny because a lot of this stuff was pulled, and I've made the comparison too of Chrono Trigger because of the time aspect. Now it does get complicated. It does get a little too complicated. But it fixed the stuff where you have these open world maps, you have these puzzles of going back and forth. It gets darker in themes with people dying and stuff like that. They do still use the paradigm system, and it works. And the whole game is just less linear. They knew to avoid the sort of hallway aspect of it. And so that game just fixed a lot of the problems that a lot of people had issues with. They pretty much removed Lightning. Give you two characters that they like better. They give you this cool concept that people have been asking for, like a true Chrono Trigger sequel for a while, and like this is pretty much the closest you're gonna get to the next gen, and things like that. So it just worked well, and it also can be almost played as its own game, and that's the big thing, which is why it's always been so bizarre that this became a Final Fantasy 13 sequel, because changing a few things and reworking other things, this could have been Final Fantasy 14 or 15, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what would have it equaled at the time and stuff like that. So it is weird. And they made sure to make Sarah, Lightning's sister, be not just lightning again, in a younger form and things like that. And so it is really cool that I mean, I get the plot of the game, you're looking for lightning and things like that, but they just decided to take it back, which made me excited because I was like, well, this should be it. This is it for Final Fantasy, because we've seen Final Fantasy get sequels like this, 10, 10-2 and stuff like that. And then for some reason we get a Final Fantasy, or they called it weird, Lightning Returns Final Fantasy 13. They don't want to call it Lightning. They don't want to call it Final Fantasy 13-3, but it's really just Final Fantasy 13-3. And this is really weird because it's a game that didn't need to exist. Again, I was such a huge fan of the series and spent so much time with 13 and 13-2 that I was like, I gotta get. This is the only game I've ever bought through like Square's website because they did a collector's edition. Came with a cool pocket watch. And I think I've shown you it before.
Yeah.
Comes with like a nice little art book and stuff like that, and it was really cool. And they were marketing it from the beginning where like this is obviously the end of Final Fantasy 13's like saga. And but then it became complicated. Like the story takes place like 500 years after Final Fantasy 13-2, and then this is where it became complicated. It removed so many things. The battle system was really cool, but the time limit is really annoying. It reminded me of like Majora's Mask, where it's like to get certain missions you gotta do it with this. So I was constantly reloading my save and then doing this, and I'm like, why is this so dumb? You took characters that people like, Snow and stuff, and made them villains, and made you actually kind of seem like a villain depending which aspect you were playing on, and things like that. So it really just went full. When I saw this, and I was like, I know they were talking about it as the end of Lightning's Tale, I was like, it felt like Lightning was going to get her own series at this point because it was so far removed even from what we knew as Final Fantasy 13. So it was always such a weird trilogy of games. Did we need a trilogy? No. It exists, and I'm happy it's there, and I do like these characters, so it is unfortunate that something like this is what keeps me coming back to the series, to these three games. So that's where I kind of stand with these three games, where it's just like this weird love mix hate smoothie that I will constantly keep ordering.
Yeah, well, I mean, you wrapped it up perfectly, so there you guys go. You ain't gonna hear nobody else go into depth about Final Fantasy 13 like that. I'll tell you what.
Yeah, I could talk about 13 for hours, so for hours.
No, I love that because, again, not many people go into depth with it, and it's not like people crap on that game. It's just I feel like a lot of people just didn't see it through. Because again, these aren't like short, 10-hour games, a little Telltale experience. Like no, these are full RPGs. So a lot of people just didn't play it honestly. So a lot of people don't have a stance on it. So a lot of people went from 13 to 15 or 13, 14, 15 or whatever like that. They didn't play the sequels. So I guess a natural place to kind of bring this all together and kind of wrap it up is I wouldn't say on the horizon, but within maybe a year to 18 months, we'll have the next Final Fantasy out. Final Fantasy 16. It's a proper PlayStation exclusive. It's a major deal because, again, it's the first mainline one in a number of years. 15 came out in what, 2016?
16, I want to say.
Yeah, around there. So it's been 5-6 years since we've gotten a mainline one. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that because, it got like DLC drops and stuff like that. So we've heard about 15 a lot, up until the last few years. But yeah, we're going to get a mainline proper Final Fantasy 16. From what they've shown so far, it looks really, really good. It looks like it's kind of a return to the fantasy setting. Now, the extent of which it is a fantasy setting with no technological incorporations, unclear. But it does seem to have a heavier focus on magic and knights and dragons and stuff like that, which is really, really awesome. So my question is for you. We've talked about a ton of different styles in Final Fantasy games. And my question is, for 16, what do you want them to do? Do you want them to do something completely unexplored? If there is a style that you think they did really good in the past, would you like to see them return to that? What do you have in mind?
So a lot of what I have in mind for 16 is actually, we haven't talked much about 15, but it's a lot of reactionary to 15. 15 gave us this huge open world, but let's be honest, there was nothing to do in it. There was huge moments of nothing. So it's like I don't mind having a smaller world if it's better. Now, obviously, this one with Clive, we're gonna see. There's like 6 factions, I think, if I remember from what they've talked about, and they're all pretty much in this war and stuff like that. So I don't mind obviously seeing different environments. I do. That's one issue I had with 15, and to an extent even the 13 series, is where things look too similar. We haven't seen too much. I know we've seen like Clive fighting in like a swamp. He fights like a tentacle monster or something like that, or if I remember slightly. But I think his name is Clive. I keep calling him. In my head, his name is Clive. I think that's
you named him.
I think that's his character's name. I could be making it up.
Well, if it's not, it is now.
Yeah, it isn't. He'll forever be Clive now. So that's my thing. It's like I want the game to just give us a world that we enjoy being with, because most Final Fantasies will get a solid combat. Most will find the right game hook. And that's my issue with 15. As much as I like those characters and some of the elements in 15, really the game was you were just running around and then holding a button to attack, and then like that just didn't feel Final Fantasy, and it also didn't feel like Kingdom Hearts or anything like that. So I want it to feel like I'm actually playing the game, not just watching the game and then running from section to section. It's obviously already setting the mood right correctly. Especially I remember that first trailer we saw at the PS5, a PS5 event, I don't remember which one, and even for a minute, just for a moment, I thought that it was a remake of a previous Final Fantasy game, because we were seeing chocobos look like chocobos, and we're seeing all this fantasy and this armor and these magic and crystals everywhere, which is a big thing in Final Fantasy that we lost for some titles.
Yep.
And so that's what I want in this. I want it to be a new age of Final Fantasy where it's like we're 16 titles later, plus not even including spin-offs. 16 titles later, let's try to get the best of all the worlds that we've built, but make sure they click together. It's not just hodgepodging and then here's what it is. Here's a crap fest. No, I don't want that. I like get the best of it, morph it that they work together well, and hopefully we can get a really good masterpiece. I mean, the little we've seen looks fantastic. Graphics look way more. I thought this game would be farther out, but it looks great. It looks smooth, and that's what I want. I want memorable characters, memorable boss fights, because that's another thing. It's like I can maybe name 2 good boss fights in like Final Fantasy 15. 13's, again, it's besides maybe like fighting the 2 bike people in Final Fantasy 13 1. I don't really. The rest of them are all just shiny, glowing. Bosses and battles and stuff like that. So we've got to make those moments memorable, because that's what we're going to come back to. When you look at like Final Fantasy 7 Remake, those boss fights were pretty great. Those one-on-one fights is what some of the best. When you're fighting like Reno and those guys, those one-on-one fights are some of the best in that game. And when you do get to fight, a small spoiler, I guess, when you fight Sephiroth, like that was amazing. And those are the things that it's going to keep you coming back, is those moments. So that's what I'm kind of hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, lots of great points. And you kind of tapped into a little bit at the end there what I was going to say, which is, from a gameplay perspective, to me, Final Fantasy VII Remake is perfection but of that kind of active combat where you can kind of slow things down to cast things. You can adjust things if you want it a little bit more closer to turn-based, but that is the way I would like it to go. Anything close to that, I'm happy. Maybe they could add some of like I think 15's combat had some cool things, especially with kind of like that kind of hook shot navigation, taking kind of the high ground and striking downward thing. I think that was a good mechanic that could be maybe incorporated going forward. So I wasn't mad at that at all. From a narrative perspective, I've never necessarily had a problem with some of the narrative choices that Final Fantasy has made. Even if I think certain stories are better than other, I don't think they've necessarily had a problem differentiating each one. So like 15 story doesn't feel like 12s, that doesn't feel like 10s or 9s. Like they've always, from just a purely narrative standpoint, have had no problem differentiating with them. So I'm cool with whatever they want to do there. They've explored lots of different things in both tech and fantasy, so if they want to do something more conventional, I think there is awesome stories to be told there. If they want to do something super off and weird and hard to follow, they've done that too, and I'm not mad at that as well. So yeah, for me it all just comes down to the world and the combat. I would love to be like Final Fantasy VII. For navigation, I think it's all about striking that balance between linear and open world. And again, I think 7 Remake is still a great example of that, where you have it's not as hallway as like 13, for example, but everything I would say is guided. So you have an area that you're guided in. But the perfect example, and I can't believe I'm forgetting the name, but that city that you're in, oh man, I forget, where you do all those quests. You're in a city at one point with Cloud. That is an example of a bigger version of that is where I think would be the sweet spot, where you're not traveling for miles and miles to find another quest. Everything's in an area, but there's so much exciting areas for like exploration and stuff like that. So yeah, 7 Remake is what I'm pointing to. You do 7 Remake with high fantasy, you ain't gonna get a complaint out of me. Period.
Perfect.
And that would be a nice return to form for me, because I like most of the Final Fantasy games. I love certain ones, but I like most of them. But the last time I really loved the Final Fantasy game was Final Fantasy 9. It's been a very long time. And 9 was technically before my time, so I've never actually really experienced a Final Fantasy game in real time that I absolutely loved, that was properly numbered, with exception for like 7 Remake. So it's been a very long time for me. I prefer the old style, and the new style they haven't really perfected in my eyes, except for 7 Remake. So I want them to go in that direction personally. However, there's something about it that I feel like I'm gonna rock with this one for sure. Some of the narrative choices there, the way it looks, the way the battle system looks. I'm like, this looks like something I'm really gonna rock with, and I'm just excited to see what they're able to do on the new hardware too. That's another exciting thing, is that I feel like Final Fantasy always finds a cool way to push the visuals of a particular console. And like, just think about like when 15 and 13 those came out. It's just incredible. So I'm hoping 16 can do that for the PS5 specifically, and show what they can do. I want to see that ray tracing, man. Show me those dragon skills shining, man. I want to see it.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, long topic, but I knew this was going to be a long one, because I mean, it's Final Fantasy and we didn't even breach everything, and so I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in the future we do a part 2 to this discussion, because I think there's still lots to unpack, especially with Final Fantasy 1 through 5. I don't think we tapped into too much, and it's because a lot of people don't talk about it. A lot of people haven't played it in some time. I would probably need to refresh my memory a little bit on it, but there's lots we haven't touched and lots I'd like to get into regarding Final Fantasy. But yeah, that's the show for you guys this week. For anybody who's still listening, we're not going to be doing a show next week. We're going to be back on, and then we're going to be back off, because I'm in the middle of the move. He's visiting somewhere. There's a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
So you'll see some episodes here, episodes not there, but we'll communicate everything at the head of the next few shows to let you know what the schedule is going to be looking like for these next few weeks. But keep subscribed. There's going to be content coming out and stuff like that as well. Oh, go check out his stream too as well. What's your Twitch name?
Seriously, Steven. So I do stream most afternoons, and yeah, I'm there.
Go check out his streams, guys, because in my absence, he will have tons of great content, and his streams are really, really good. So go check that out. So this has been the NeoVintage Podcast. I am Jabril, and I am with
Steve. Hope you guys enjoyed.
And we'll see you guys next week.